Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I'm here to bring you a battle between the two Zendikar Rising Commander decks and the Battle of the Horde challenge deck from Born of the Gods. We'll be playing two games, first on normal difficulty and then on hard mode. And for these games we'll be using 3 hero cards. The first one is the Harvester. It says tap, draw a card, then discard a card. The second is the Explorer, which says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. And the last is the Vanquisher, which says your starting hand size is increased by 1, your maximum hand size is increased by 1. We'll get started by drawing our opening hands. Anowon draws a Necromantic Selection, Heirloom Blade, Meringue River Prowler, Military Intelligence, Mind Stone, Open into Wonder, Consuming Aberration, and Soul Manipulation. We have 0 lands, and so that's an obvious no keep. We're going to mulligan this, and because this is multiplayer, we'll get 1 free mulligan. Now we have a Scytheclaw, Sepulchral Primordial, Dimir Guildgate, Island, Aetherize, Island, Swamp, and Extract from Darkness. This is a really slow hand, and I think it's actually worth it to go down to 7, and so we will mulligan once more. Now we have an Island, a Swamp, an Island, a Price of Fame, a Soaring Thought Thief, a Frog Tosser Banneret, and a Whirler Rogue. I think that this is actually a good hand. So we'll keep this, and we'll take the Price of Fame and put this on the bottom. Obuun draws an Elite Scale Guard, a Trove Warden, a Planar Outburst, a Core Cartographer, a Needlespires, a Plains, a Yavimaya Elder, and a Forest. This isn't a great hand because there's not a lot we can do early, but I think it's close enough that we keep it regardless. Because this is multiplayer, we'll draw on our opening turns. Anowon draws an Island, and Obuun draws a Ground Assault. Anowon will play an Island and a Swamp. We'll tap both of these and cast Soaring Thought Thief. This is a 1/3 human rogue with flash and flying. As long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, rogues you control get +1/+0. Whenever 1 or more rogues you control attack, each opponent mills 2 cards. Obuun will play the Needlespires. This is a land. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap for red or white and pay 2 red-white, and it becomes a 2/1 red elemental creature with double strike until end of turn, and it's still a land. We'll also play a Forest, and then we will end the turn. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Latchkey Fairy, and we will discard one of the Swamps. Obuun draws a Forest, and we will discard the Ground Assault. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Myriad Landscape, and Obuun draws a Cryptic Caves. Obuun will play a Plains and a Forest. We'll tap everything, and we will cast Obuun, Moldiah Ancestor. This is a 3/3 legendary elf spirit. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is Obuun's power. It's still a land, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Anowon will play 2 more islands, and then we'll tap out, and we'll cast Anowon the Ruin Thief. This is a 2/4 legendary vampire rogue. Other rogues you control get +1/+1. Whenever 1 or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If a player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw a card. That will make the Soaring Thought Thief a 2/4, and we will go ahead and attack with the Soaring Thought Thief. As we attack, it's going to trigger the Soaring Thought Thief's ability, and we'll mill 2 cards. And then we'll deal 2 more damage. And then that will trigger Anowon's ability, and we'll mill 2 more cards. Because at least one of them was a creature, Anowon will draw a card. This is an island. And then we'll go to the end of the turn. We'll use the Harvester, which I forgot to untap last turn. Anowon will draw a Scourge of Fleets, and we will discard the Scourge of Fleets. Obuun will draw an Elvish Rejuvenator, and then we will discard the Planar Outburst. We'll untap. Anowon will draw a Sig River Cutthroat, and Obuun will draw a Jungle Shrine. Obuun will tap 4 mana. And we'll cast the Core Cartographer. This is a 2/2 Core Scout. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a Plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Here's the Plains. It'll enter the battlefield tapped. We'll shuffle. Because a land entered the battlefield, we'll put a counter on Obuun. And then we will play the Jungle Shrine. This is a land. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for red, green, or white. We'll put another counter on Obuun. We'll also play the Cryptic Caves. This is a land. You can tap it for colorless, or you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. That'll add another counter to Obuun. Anowon will play the Island and the Myriad Landscape. This is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for colorless, or pay 2, tap, and sacrifice it to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Share a land type, put them onto your battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. With our 5 mana, we'll pay 2 of them, and then cast the Frog Tosser Banneret. This is a 1/1 Goblin Rogue with haste, and Goblin spells and Rogue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And then we will go to combat. We will turn the Cryptic Caves into a 6/6, and we will attack with the Cryptic Caves, with Obuun, with the Soaring Thought Thief, with Anowon, as well as the Banneret. The first thing that will trigger is the Soaring Thought Thief's ability. We'll mill 2. And then we mill the Altar of Mogus. It says when it is put into a graveyard from anywhere, the Horde sacrifices 2 Minotaurs. It has none to sacrifice. Because we milled, there are now 8 cards in the graveyard, and so the Soaring Thought Thief is now a 3/4. And so we will deal 19 damage. We mill a Vitality Salve, which says when it is put into a graveyard from anywhere, each player returns a creature card from his or her graveyard to the battlefield. This will be the Scourge of Fleets for Anowon. It is a 6/6 Kraken. Whenever it enters the battlefield, return each creature your opponents control with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands you control. There are no creatures that the opponent controls. And then Obuun has no creatures in his graveyard. We also mill the Massacre Totem. It says when it is put into a graveyard from anywhere, put the top 7 cards of the Horde's library into its graveyard. We mill 2 Plundered Statues, which says when it is put into a graveyard from anywhere, each player draws a card. We also mill a Refreshing Elixir, which says when it's put into a graveyard from anywhere, each player gains 5 life. So we will draw 2 cards each. Anowon draws an In Garruk's Wake and a Sepulchral Primordial. Obuun draws a Condemn and a Mending of Dominaria. And then we will gain 10 life to go up to 50 life. And then we will trigger Anowon's ability, which will be for the Horde to mill 7 cards. And there was a creature among them, so Anowon will draw another card. This is a Necromantic Selection. And then Anowon will follow up by casting for 2 mana, because of the Banneret's ability, the Latchkey Fairy. This is a 3/1 fairy rogue with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, if its prowl cost was paid, draw a card. So we'll draw another card, which is a Fated Return. And then we will end the turn. This will now go to the Horde. The Horde will cast the top 3 spells. We have a Refreshing Elixir. It's an artifact at the beginning of the Horde's pre-combat main phase. Reveal an additional card from the top of the Horde's library. The Horde casts that card. A Minotaur Younghorn. This is a 2/2 Minotaur with haste and attacks each turn if able. And we have a Consuming Rage. Sorcery, whenever a Minotaur attacks this turn, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Destroy that creature at the end of combat. The Minotaur Younghorn will attack as a 4/2, and it will be destroyed at the end of combat. We'll block it with the Scourge of Fleets, killing the Minotaur Younghorn. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Spinal Embrace, and we will discard the Spinal Embrace. Obuun draws a Terramorphic Expanse, and we will discard the Condemn. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Swamp. Obuun draws a Mountain. Anowon will play the Swamp. Obuun will spend 3 mana and cast the Elvish Rejuvenator. This is a 1/1 Elf Druid, and when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a land from among them onto the battlefield tap, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. We have a Naya Panorama, a Forest, and a Gruul Guildgate as options that we can put onto the battlefield tapped. Go ahead and take the Gruul Guildgate and put it on the battlefield tapped. There's a gate and enter the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for red or green. We'll shuffle these and put them on the bottom. As the land enters the battlefield, we'll go ahead and add another counter to Obuun. This should be a land. And then we will play a Terramorphic Expanse. This is a land. You can tap it and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. We will go ahead and immediately use its ability and sacrifice it and search our library for a basic land. But first we'll put a counter onto Obuun for it coming onto the battlefield. We'll take a forest and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We'll shuffle. And then we will play a mountain. This will add another counter to Obuun. We'll then tap 5 mana. Sorry, I meant 4 mana to cast the Trove Warden. This is a 3/4 cat beast with vigilance. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile target permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. When it dies, put each permanent exiled this way onto the battlefield under the control of that card's owner. Then we will go to combat, and Obuun will turn the Cryptic Caves into a 9/9, and we'll attack with everybody. That will do 40 damage, which I don't think that there are enough cards left, and so we will just say that we won here. On normal difficulty, we'll be back for hard mode. Alright, it's time for hard mode. We'll only have 2 turns before the Horde comes in attacking. We'll draw our opening hands. Anowon draws a Murder, Silumgar's Command, Island, Ingorok's Wake, Soaring Thought Thief, Dimir Locket, Gonti Lord of Luxury, and Triton Shorestalker. Unfortunately, this is not enough lands, and so we will mulligan this. Now we have an island, a Frog Tosser Banneret, a Merfolk Windrobber, a Murder, an Heirloom Blade, an Ingorok's Wake, and a Triton Shorestalker. I don't think that this is significantly better because we don't have any black mana sources at all. And so we will mulligan down to 7. Now we have a Whisper Steel Dagger, a Command Tower, Scytheclaw, Island, Swamp, Island, Jwar Isle Refuge, and an Island. This is actually pretty bad because there's no action at all. So I think what we're going to have to do is mulligan down to 6. Now we have a Dimir Signet, a Marsh Flitter, a Swamp, a Sepulchral Primordial, a Triton Shorestalker, a Soul Ring, a Soaring Thought Thief, and an Obelisk of Erd. I'm going to keep this even though it's kind of bad, just because we have the Signets and the Soul Ring to potentially get to the mana that we need. And so we will take the Sepulchral Primordial and the Obelisk of Erd, and we'll stick those on the bottom. Obuun draws an Armorcraft Judge, a Together Forever, Acidic Slime, Sandstone Oracle, Treacherous Terrain, Mina and Den Wildborn, Naya Charm, and Hour of Revelation. You don't keep a 0-lander, and so we will mulligan this. Now we have an Hour of Revelation, Naya Panorama, Silesian Sanctuary, Cryptic Caves, Far Wanderings, Harrow, Return of the Wildspeaker, and a Mountain. I think that this is actually an acceptable first hand, and so we will keep it. And because this is multiplayer, we get the free mulligan. We'll open with a card drop because it's multiplayer as well. Anowon draws a Sure-Footed Infiltrator, and Obuun draws a Rites of Flourishing. We will begin with Anowon by playing the Swamp. We'll tap the Swamp to cast Soul Ring. This is an artifact. You can tap it to add 2 colorless. We'll tap it immediately to add 2 colorless to cast the Dimir Signet. This is an artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it to add blue and black. And then Obuun will play a Mountain, And we'll also play the Naya Panorama. This is a land. It taps for colorless. You can pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic mountain, forest, or plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. We'll go ahead and tap the mountain and tap the Naya Panorama and use its ability to grab ourselves a forest. And then we'll end the turn. We'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws an island, and we will discard the Triton Shorestalker. Obuun will draw a Geode Rager, and we will discard the Hour of Revelation. We'll untap. Anowon draws an island. Obuun draws a Mina and Din Wildborn. Anowon will play both islands. Anowon will tap the island to tap the Dimir Signet to cast the Soaring Thought Thief. Then we'll also tap all the remaining mana to cast Anowon. And then Obuun will tap the forest and the mountain. We'll play the Selesnya Sanctuary. This is a land that enters the battlefield tap. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Tap it for green and white. We'll put it onto the battlefield, take the forest back into our hand, and then replay the forest and immediately tap it. For 3 mana, with the 3 mana, we will play the Rite of Flourishing. This is an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, and each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. We are now going to go to the Horde's turn. The Horde are going to cast the top 3 cards. They will cast a Minotaur Goreseeker. This is a 3/2 Minotaur with haste and attacks each turn if able. They have a Phobos Reaver. This is a 2/3 Minotaur with haste and attacks each turn if able. And then another Minotaur Goreseeker. All of these will go on the attack. And we will block one of the Goreseekers with Anowon, and we will block the other Goreseeker with the Soaring Thought Thief. We'll take 2 from the Phobos Reaver to go down to 38, and both of the Goreseekers will die. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a swamp, and we'll discard the swamp. Obuun will draw a forest, and we will discard Return of the Wildspeaker. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Una, Queen of the Fae. Anowon draws an island. Obuun draws a forest, and Obuun draws another forest. Anowon will play an island. We'll tap all 4, and then cast Obuun from the command zone. And then we will play 3 entire forests. That'll put 3 triggers on Obuun. And to get 3 counters, we'll tap all 3 of these mana to cast Harrow. This is an instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put them onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. We'll sacrifice this forest to search for 2 more cards. We'll take this plains and put it onto the battlefield. And we'll take this mountain and put it onto the battlefield. We'll shuffle. We'll get 2 more triggers of Obuun's ability, taking him up to an 8/8. We'll go to combat, and we will take the plains and turn it into an 8/8. And then we will attack with everybody. This will cause the Soaring Thought Thief's ability to trigger. The Refreshing Elixir will give us 10 life, taking us up to 48. And that will deal 12 damage to the Horde. The Horde mills the Altar of Mogus. We'll sacrifice the Phobos Reaver, as well as a Massacre Totem. We'll mill 7. And then we'll trigger this ability here to mill an additional 4. Milled another Refreshing Elixir, and so we will gain another 10 life to go up to 58. And then we will draw a card because we milled the creatures. Here is a Dimir Locket. We'll tap 3 to cast the Dimir Locket. This is an artifact. It taps for blue or black, and you can pay 4 hybrid Dimir mana and tap it and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. And then we will tap 4 more mana and cast the Sure-Footed Infiltrator. This is a 2/3 Merfolk Rogue, and you can tap another untapped rogue you control, and it can't be blocked this turn. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And then we will pass to the Horde. The Horde will cast the top 3 cards. We have the Mogus Chosen. It's a 5/4 Minotaur. It enters battlefield tapped and attacks each turn if able. We have a Minotaur Younghorn and a Plundered Statue. At the beginning of the Horde's pre-combat main phase, reveal an additional card from the top of the Horde's library. The Horde casts that card. And then we'll be attacked by the Minotaur Younghorn, who will bump into Obuun and perish. We will, at the end of the turn, use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Rogue's Passage and will discard the Rogue's Passage. Obuun draws an Elvish Rejuvenator, and we will discard the Geode Rager. And then we'll untap. Anowon draws a Myriad Landscape and a Rise from the Grave. Obuun draws a Mountain and a Rampaging Baloths. Obuun will tap 6 and cast the Rampaging Baloths. This is a 6/6 beast with trample, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. And then we will play the Mountain. This will trigger Obuun. This will trigger the Rampaging Baloths. Then we'll play the Cryptic Caves. Again, we'll trigger Obuun and the Rampaging Baloths. And then Obuun will tap 3 mana. And we'll cast the Elvish Rejuvenator. And we will look at the top 5. And then we will take the Command Tower. This is a land. You can tap for 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. It'll enter the battlefield tapped. And that will trigger Obuun. And that will trigger the Rampaging Baloths. Anowon will play the Myriad Landscape. It enters the battlefield tapped. And then Anowon will tap 8 mana. And then Anowon will tap 6 mana. And play Una, Queen of the Fae. This is a 5/5 legendary fairy wizard with flying, and you can pay X and hybrid. Choose a color. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. For each card of the chosen color exiled this way, create a 1/1 blue and black fairy rogue creature token with flying. We'll go to combat. The Cryptic Caves will turn into an 11/11. We'll attack with the Cryptic Caves, and Obuun will attack with all of the rogues that can attack. The Soaring Thought Thief will give an additional +1 to each of these as well for 32 damage. There's only 29 cards left. A Vitality Salve is milled. Anowon will return the Triton Shore Stalker to the battlefield. This is a 1/1 Merfolk Rogue and it can't be blocked. Obuun will return the Geode Rager to the battlefield. This is a 4/3 elemental with first strike, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, goad each creature target player controls. We also draw a Plundered Statue. Anowon draws an Endless Obedience, and Obuun draws an Emeria Shepherd. We don't have much else to do but to pass to the Horde's turn. The Horde will untap and will attack with their Mogus Chosen, which will run into the Geode Rager and die to first strike. And then with all the Minotaurs gone and the library milled out, the Zendikar Rising Commander decks defeat the Horde in straight sets, and that wasn't that bad at all. Let me know what you thought about the games in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you would like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.